Boatworks today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So welcome back to the shop, everybody. Hope you're all doing very well. My name is Andy with Boatworks today. And this past week, actually 2 weeks, I have been focused on trying to get all of my stuff moved out of the old shop, because as of right now, at least as far as I know, we're still on track to close that deal June 3. So I've got a bit of a time crunch, actually 3 weeks to be exact, to get everything out, and there's a lot there, and it's not exactly just across the street. So it's proving to be a fairly time-consuming process, but that's all right. We'll work through it. So what I think, as a result of that though, I haven't had really any shop time here other than when I was here just to unload stuff. Now that doesn't mean that I can't still put together some content that I think is going to be helpful for a lot of people. Now I know for a fact that there are a lot of people that watch this channel that are very experienced. They have done projects, fiberglass, woodworking, you name it. They've done this for years, but I know disproportionately that there are a larger group of people here that are first-time boat owners. They're getting into a project that they've never done before for the first time. And going into that kind of a situation, the learning curve tends to be very steep. So what I think I'm going to do over the next at least 2 weeks, this week and next, hopefully I'll be done moving by the time before Memorial Day. That's kind of the deadline here. Well, but what I think I'm going to be focusing on are going to be kind of topics that are going to be geared more so for those first-time project doers. I think there's still going to be a lot of info here that's going to be helpful for pretty much everybody, but for the next foreseeable future, I think the content that I'm going to be able to cover, given the time restrictions that I have, are going to be focused more so for those first-time boat owners. So for this week, what I want to cover are my top 5 must-have tools that you're going to want to have for pretty much doing any kind of a boat project. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to use every single one of these tools all in one day, but I can all but guarantee that throughout the course of even a small project, you will use every single one of these. Now, before I jump into it, one thing I want to stress here is please don't get hung up on the particular brands that I'm showing you. There are a lot of much more cost-effective or reasonably priced options out there that will do the same thing as the tools I'm going to be showing you here. Now, I did this work for 20 years, so for me, in my particular situation, it made sense to invest in good tools, but most people are looking at a one-off project or something that they're going to use occasionally, and justifying the price of a really high-end tool just doesn't make sense. Now, like I said, there are a lot of other options out there. Harbor Freight specials are a wonderful choice. I work with a number of people that use strictly Harbor Freight stuff, and it gets the job done, and it's lasted, over some pretty dirty, grimy jobs. So, like I said, don't focus on the brands in particular. Just focus on what the individual tools are designed to do. Number 5 on my list is this, and you may be wondering, well, what the hell is this? This is a particle separator. This is the Dust Deputy. It's made by Oneida Air Systems. Now, I will fully admit that when I first heard about this years ago, I thought that it was 100% just a gimmick, right? It's around, I forget what the price was at that time. I want to say it's like 120 bucks. At that time, it was probably going back almost 10 years ago. But I figured, at that time, before I had this, I was going through filter bags about 1 or 2 every single day, depending on the type of work that I was doing. So I figured, if it works and it saves me even a quarter of the bags, it'll pay for itself over time. Well, surprisingly enough, I went from going through having to replace the bags on my actual vacuum instead of once or twice a day to maybe twice a month. So it made a considerable difference. Now, the way that this works is obviously you got to have your vacuum. So the vacuum attaches onto the top here, and then the hose coming off the other port here, this is what attaches to your tool. And I don't understand how it works, because if the vacuum is pulling from right here and the dust is coming in through right here, why doesn't the dust just get sucked up and go straight to the vacuum? Well, it doesn't. Again, I know it has something to do with the cone here and centrifugal force, blah, blah, blah. Don't really care as long as it works. But It collects all the fine dust, and it's fiberglass. If you've ever sanded fiberglass, you know that the particles are extremely fine, which is why they clog up your filters on your vacuum so quickly. I'm not saying that it filters out or spins out all of the dust, but I would say confidently that it filters out at least 98%. But it just spins it all down here, collects it down in the bottom here, and like I said, it extends your filter life by considerably. I can't really quantify it, but it makes a significant difference. Now, the reason I'm showing this particular brand is there are a number, maybe a handful of other types of dust separators, but over the tests that I've seen comparing, I know Festool makes one, Oneida makes one. Like I said, there's a half a dozen other brands out there. This one seemed to consistently come out on top. So this would be one of the rare exceptions where I would say if you're looking for a dust separator, this particular brand is one that I would strongly recommend going with because I know you'll be happy with it. But again, for the initial upfront cost, I'm not sure what they're going for now, but I'm sure they're a little bit more than when I bought them. Everything typically is at this point. But over the course of even a single project, the cost of this will save you the cost of replacing these filters. Seriously? Hold on. That was U-Haul. Evidently, I'm getting a 26-foot truck on Monday. Anyways, so where was I? Oh, yeah, all right. So one thing you're going to realize pretty quickly if you're going into a project for the first time is that anything to do with a boat is going to require a lot of sanding. It's kind of a long-standing running joke that I always used to have is when people used to ask what I did, I always used to say, I'm a professional sander that also happens to work on a boat. And that is absolutely 100% true. If you've ever done a project, I know that there are a lot of you right now going, yep, he's right. But pretty much any boat project is going to be, whether it's fiberglass or woodworking or whatever it may happen to be, pretty much every project is going to be, I'm just going to say roughly 95% sanding, occasional cutting, and then another 5% of the actual work or laying up the whatever material you happen to be working with. So because this type of work is so sanding heavy and dust, it creates a lot of dust. That is why I'm including this as number 5 on my top 5 must-have tools for your project. So number 4 on my list is one of those things that every time I use it, it gets a lot of attention. And to be quite honest, it was one of those things that I didn't know that I needed until I actually had it. And all I'm going to say is holy time saver and holy hand cramp saver. And that is this little guy. This is some electric shears or electric scissors. I believe I got this from Jamestown Distributors, and it doesn't look like it's really much of anything. But even though it's tiny, this thing is a workhorse. If you're cutting through a number layer of glass or anything that has actual patterns, this thing will be your new best friend. I will include links down below. They are not affiliate links, but I will include links down below to Jamestown link for these easy cutters, I think is what they're called. Yeah, easy cutter. EC cutter? I don't know. But if you're going to be working with fiberglass material and you're going to be needing to do a fair amount of cutting, you will not regret having this in your back pocket. And number 3 on my list is this guy. Now again, not necessarily this particular brand, but this particular type of tool. Now, what this is an oscillating cutter. And whenever I'm cutting off fiberglass skins for doing deck replacements or core replacements, this is what you're going to see me go to every single time. Now, the reason I like this is because this is the cutting head on here, it vibrates, it oscillates, it does not spin. So because of that, this doesn't create hardly any dust whatsoever. It's a very clean way to do a lot of cutting fairly quickly. Now, I know that this particular one is made by Fine, or Fin, F-E-I-N. And this price point wise, this is at the top end of all the options that are available out there. But I know a lot of people that are using the Harbor Freight Special. I'm not quite sure exactly what that cost is. I want to say it's right around like 65 bucks compared to 350 bucks. And I know one person in particular, Jim, I'm not going to mention your last name, but he's doing a core replacement. I think it's on a Catalina 36. And he's already cut off half of the side decks on the sailboat. And he's like, this thing is running like a champ. It hasn't skipped a beat. So for these types of projects, in a lot of ways, it may not always make sense to invest in a high quality tool, because think about the material that you're working with. It's fiberglass. Fiberglass is the devil on tools, specifically motors. So in a lot of ways, sometimes it might make a lot more sense to look at tools get them as cheaply as you can and kind of look at them as somewhat disposable. I don't like really saying that, but at the end of the day, that's what a lot of tools are, especially your really, really cheap ones. But as an alternative to this particular brand, I would seriously take a hard look at the Harbor Freight brand. Bauer, I'm not sure exactly which line it is that makes their oscillating cutter, but everybody that I've talked to that is using that particular brand, or from Harbor Freight, loves it. So much more price or cost effective, and it still gets the job done. And at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. So number 2 on my list, the Humble sander. Now, again, I'm not pushing any particular brand, but I am going to be pushing some of the features that this particular sander has. And the main one being, it has built-in dust collection. Now, as I mentioned earlier here, roughly 95% of a project, the time that you spend on it, you're going to be spending it sanding. And because of that, sanding by nature just creates a lot of dust. So having a built-in dust port to help collect that dust right at the sanding head makes a huge difference in the overall mess that you're going to have to clean up at the end of the day or the end of the week, or whatever it may happen to be. Now, the other feature that, in my opinion, is one of the must-have things is that there's 2 different types of sanders, right? So the first type of sander is just strictly a DA, or a random orbit. And specifically what that means is that the sanding head, it just oscillates and vibrates, it goes back and forth. Maybe it slowly rotates, but it's not real aggressive. It does eventually get the job done, but it doesn't remove material very quickly. Now, when you're talking about random orbits or DAs, they come in different shades, right? So depending on how much movement this sanding head gives you, that'll determine how fast it's actually going to be removing material, which is why you have finish sanders where the head is going to be moving just a little bit. I want to say 2, maybe 3 millimeters, whereas these more of rip and tear type sanders, they're going to have a much larger throw, say like 4, 5, 6 millimeters. So the more movement there is on the head, the faster you're going to be removing material. Now, the other option that some of these types of sanders come with is what's called a rotary option. So there's on this one in particular, there's a little setting right here where I can switch between going from random orbit into more of a rotex or rotary type motion. They're also called dual mode. And the difference on that, when you're talking about material removal, is literally night and day. So when you're in dual mode or in rotex mode, the sanding head on here, it doesn't vibrate back and forth, it just strictly turns. And it's going to be, I believe they're almost always gear driven. So it's kind of like a slow speed grinder per se. So depending on the type of paper that you have on here, it's not going to be as fast as a high speed grinder when you're talking about sanding down fiberglass. But if you've got a little bit of extra time on your hands, or I should say you're not looking to get a project done in 20 minutes, if you've got say more like 40 minutes, this is a very, very good option. Now, because I use this primarily on fiberglass, I don't ever use the random orbit function. I keep it on the rotex function just for fast material removal, but also because it has a dust collection, I can remove material all day long without making a hell of a mess. And for me, again, I'm kind of a bit of a dust phobe. For me, that's a big selling point. Now, as far as options here, as I mentioned, I'm not pushing this particular brand. This one's Festool. I don't even want to know what these things go for now. I didn't, when I got this, I didn't pay that much for it. But I know one other option that has these same features that I'm talking about here with the dust collection, the random orbit, as well as the rotary or the dual action, is I believe it's made by Bosch. And price point wise, it's about half of what the Festool is. And I personally have never used that particular brand, but there are a lot of channels out there that are using that specifically because of the price point. But they seem to work just as well. So if I were going into a project like this, I personally wouldn't necessarily be looking at Festool unless it was going to be something that I was going to be using on other things. If you do a lot of woodworking, if it's a tool that you're going to be using a lot, yeah, you might be able to justify that cost. But for going in for occasional use, I would 100% be looking at one of the Bosch. Now, this particular sander is a 6-inch sanding head on it. I believe the Bosch in the dual action, at least at the price point that I'm talking about, is a 5-inch. But to be quite honest, it's a 5 and a 6-inch head isn't going to make that big of a difference. So I would have absolutely no issues with going with a slightly smaller sander as long as it has these 3 features that I was talking about. So the number 1 tool on my list is my go-to sander, and it's probably the one that I reach for 9 times out of 10, and that's no exaggeration. And that is just this little Makita, I think it's like a 1 1/8 inch belt sander. Now they make a smaller version of this. I've never used that one. This has always been my go-to, primarily because the radius at the business end of this sander here, coincidentally, is almost the same radius as every radius you're going to see on most production boats. So for establishing any kind of a curvature or radius, this tends to just work out perfect. You can take it and run it right along the edge, and it creates a consistent, uniform curvature or radius every single time. Now, it's also handy because, if you're doing, say, like little spot repairs, like you got old screw holes that you're looking to fill in, you can just use this, make a little dimple around the screw hole, get it down to fiberglass, fill the hole. Now you've got a perfect little dimple, that's only about this big, instead of coming at it with a larger grinder where now your repair area is going to have to be, 2-3 times the size. It's small, it's portable, and I'm not going to say the dust collection on here is real great. It does have a built-in dust port on the back here. Honestly, I think it sucks. But the main advantage of this is because this is a belt sander, this belt is constantly rotating in the same direction. You can direct where you want that dust to shoot, and you can sit right behind it with a vacuum, suck it up, and I'd say you get probably 95-98% of all the dust collected right at the source where you're doing your work. But this little guy is a champ. I got this back in 2004. It was the first year that I was in business when I went off on my own here. And I was, at that time, my big winter project that first year was I was replacing a teak deck on an Island Gypsy. I want to say it was like a 46-foot powerboat, multiple level boat, a lot of deck. And that was my first big project on my own. So when I was working with teak decking systems, they said, you've got to get this sander. It is just the best. It's the best option out there for doing any of your fine radiuses or contouring, anything like any shaping like that. So that's when I first got it back in 2004, and this is still that same unit. It hasn't been replaced. It's never let me down. At the end of the day, when I'm done with it, I blow it out and I stick it back in the corner on the shelf. Now, as far as the types of things that you can do with this, sanding, shaping, grinding, profiling, taking off any little nibs. It's really good for doing detail or work in detailed areas. I don't know of other brands that have something like this. I know that there are, but they tend to be more pneumatic or air driven. So I'm not sure offhand. I don't have another electric option for this Makita, but I'm not exaggerating here. This is one of those things, it is not one of the cheapest items on my top 5 list here by any means, but once you have it, if you're going to be doing projects, anything that's going to be boat related, this will be your go-to sander 9 times out of 10. So even though it's a little bit more, it's so handy and it just works extremely well. So there are my top 5 must-have tools for your boating projects. Now hopefully you found this helpful, and if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you're notified when new videos come out pretty much every Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Central. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions on quick topics that you'd like me to cover over the next week or two, please leave those down below in the comment section. I will be following those, obviously. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.